that's just kind of a difficult situation in that it boils down to a 2-game season, the way things are set up in the Big Ten right now.
Yeah, it really does. And of course, everybody knows at this point that for the second year in a row in that 2-game season, they've gone 0-2. And for the second year in a row, every other game outside of those two, they, for the most part, have been completely in control and have won comfortably and done what you would expect a team that is on the caliber that you want them to be on to do. But it's a 2-game season, and it's for the second year in a row. Like I said, you go 0-2 in those games, and this year there was no doubt about it. What the problem was, it was the offense. Your defense played more than well enough to win both of those games. And, in both of them, your offense let you down in different ways. Against Michigan, they ran the ball extremely well on Saturday. That's part of what made that game so frustrating. They rushed for, I think, like 175 yards, averaged over 4 yards per carry. Going into that game, if you were Penn State, you would have gladly taken 4.5 yards a carry and 170 yards, 175 on the ground, whatever it was, but they couldn't throw the ball at all. And, as everybody knows by now, I'm sure if you're watching, that Mike Yurcich has been let go as offensive coordinator. I would argue that the lack of development from Drew Allar this year probably played as big of a role in Yurcich being let go as anything else. You had Allar coming in as the 5-star guy, as the borderline number 1 overall recruit in the country, depending on which recruiting service you were looking at. But the tools are there. You see the tools, but you just haven't seen the progression from him you want to see. And, you bank on him being a 3-year guy because of his tools, his abilities, 3-and-out guy. And you're now at the end of year 2 and you're not seeing the progression you want to see. I think that played as much of a role in moving on from Yurcich. Not just Mike Yurcich, the offense coordinator, but Mike Yurcich, the quarterback coach as well.
Yeah, so you're okay with that move?
Yeah, coming into the year, I thought Yurcich, I still think Yurcich is a good coach. His track record speaks for itself. He was a very good offensive coordinator for a long time at Oklahoma State. When he was at Ohio State for that 1 year, he helped develop Justin Fields. That 1 year at Texas, you kind of throw it out the window. It was the COVID year. It was Tom Herman's last year. It was a messy year in Austin. But in last year, Penn State's offense was very good for the most part. But this year, it's not just that the offense fell flat against Ohio State and Michigan. It was the game plans. They were just overly conservative, especially against Ohio State. Even after the game Saturday, James Franklin made a comment in the post-game presser about how the offense hasn't done enough in these 2 games to help get Drew Allar into a rhythm early on, help set the passing game up for success. And it wasn't long after the press conference ended that there started to be some just rumblings and whatnot in Penn State circles that Yurcich might be out of a job by Monday morning. And sure enough, less than 24 hours later, he was indeed let go. So, yeah, I'm okay with it. I think James Franklin also realizes that this season was a great opportunity. I know you and I have talked about that extensively dating back to the summer, the opportunity that was at hand for Penn State this year with this defense, with a quarterback with this much talent. Your schedule was favorable. You got Michigan at home. Your toughest non-conference game was at home. Your toughest West crossover game was at home. And if there was ever going to be a year to make that jump, it felt like this was going to be the year, and they didn't make the jump, and the offense is why. And, I think on one hand, it's kudos to James Franklin for quickly making a change and knowing something needed to change. But at the other hand, and, this is probably more of a conversation for the offseason type of deal, I do wonder if James Franklin knows this offensive coordinator hire is going to be very important. Couple friends of mine and I were talking about it. It's not apples to apples, but it's still similar to when Joe Moorhead was hired going into 2016, where the program was at a crossroads. Now, this is a much different crossroads than it was in 2016. This is the type of crossroads you don't ever want to be at a crossroad, but if you're going to be at one, this is the one you want to be at because you're consistently winning 10 games. You just can't quite get over that hump. That's a much better crossroad than where they were going into that 2016 season. But I think this hire is very similar, where you need to hit a home run the way you did with Joe Moorhead. Because if this offense fails to take a big step next year with Drew Allar, or the following year with Ethan Grunkemeyer, who's a top 100 quarterback who will be coming in January, I'm not saying James Franklin all of a sudden is on the hot seat or something, but people are definitely starting to get a little restless around here with it. And, you can call it a victim of your own success, whatever you want to say. But when you're consistently that close, I've compared it a lot to Mark Richt. Mark Richt was awesome at Georgia, constantly winning 8, 9, 10 games, most years 9, 10 games, getting the SEC championship game, but just could never really get over that hump. And that led to them making a change. And Penn State's not there yet. I am not saying they're there yet because they're not. But if 2-3 years from now we're in the same position and this offense coordinator hire doesn't work out, I think maybe you're in that position. So I think James knows that this is a very important hire that he's about to make here in the coming weeks.
My only defense for Mark Richt in that comparison with James Franklin is if there was a 4-team playoff, I think Mark Richt would have made it 4 times. So that's the only thing
he definitely would have. So, I mean, I know if nothing else, there was the year when Bama beat Notre Dame in the BCS title game.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I remember going into the SEC championship game, Bama and Georgia, if I remember correctly, were ranked 1, 2, 2, 3, something like that.
Yeah.
And everyone called that the de facto national championship game.
Yeah.
Like that year alone definitely would have been. Yeah, no, you're right. And that's just a comparison I've thought of where you had a coach who was extremely successful, won a lot of football games, won conference championships, was getting to and winning at the time BCS bowls, but just never got over that national title hump, and Georgia went in a different direction. Now, I also preface that by saying Penn State doesn't have a Kirby Smart out there. Georgia got lucky in that maybe the hottest up-and-coming name in college coaching at that time was an alum who you knew was going to come home and just be a grand slam hire. That's not there right now for Penn State either. But no, to me, the Richt comparison is, hey, you're extremely successful. You're winning a lot of football games. You're doing something that would be more than good enough at almost every program in the country. But when you're at one of those top 10 to 12 type programs like Penn State is, you're always going to yearn for a little bit more.
The conversation about James Franklin long-term, we can have that in the off season. But let's go back to Yurcich. I've got one question about that, and then back to Franklin just pertaining to this game against Michigan. So with Yurcich, it's easy to tear apart play calling. That's, every other fan out there, if the plays don't work, they just say it's a bad play call. And I really think, and if you don't pass enough, a lot of fans, it's a bad play call. We're too conservative. We got to throw the ball. And they would be surprised maybe to look at the actual stats and see the teams that are winning run the ball more. But anyway, so I rarely go the play calling route unless, there's several times during a season, various teams where I'm like, that play call didn't matter or it didn't make sense. And then I challenge myself to say, okay, why didn't it make sense rather than it just didn't work? And I was trying to go through my notes from the game. Not a lot's coming to mind specifically, other than there was one critical play, and this was in the fourth quarter, where they had an odd throw to the tight end, to Tyler Warren, where they had the ball against the right hash, and the play was just sized down in terms of the scope of the field that Michigan had to cover. And you've got, a really good player, but not a quick, fast player, quick twitch guy. And it was just a condensed play, and kind of an odd call because of the position on the field.
Yeah, no, I remember the exact play you're talking about. It was a third down. Penn State's defense had just forced a punt. So you had, they were down, I think 14-9 or 17-9, excuse me, at the time. So you saw that as an opportunity. Hey, we're going to get the ball back. I think there's about 8 minutes to go. So maybe put a drive together, go down and score here and potentially tie it. But yeah, I remember that play. It was a third down and they rolled Drew to the short side of the field. And like you said, try to dump it off to Warren. It didn't work. He didn't catch the ball anyway, but even if he did, like you said, he wasn't going to go anywhere. Yeah, that one definitely stood out to me. I thought Saturday, Mike Yurcich didn't necessarily call a bad game, but I also felt the lack of development from Drew Allar shine through. I go back to late in the fourth quarter. It was Penn State's next to last possession where they went for it on fourth down, didn't get it, and in the very next play, Corum ripped off that touchdown run to put the game on ice.
Yeah.
On third down, first off, they should have punted on fourth down, but that's on James Franklin and nobody else. That was a mistake. Okay. But secondly, on third down, Drew Allar had Caden Saunders wide open in the middle of the field. It would have been a first down and then some if he hit Saunders in stride. Even if he doesn't hit him in stride, even if he just puts the ball on where Saunders had to stop to catch the ball, he still gets a first down. And he threw it behind him, and it was closer to being intercepted than anything else when he had 2 or 3 steps on the defensive back. Like, I think plays like that are what really shine through as well, because whenever it's game 10 of the season for a quarterback, especially a quarterback that came in with the caliber and the hoopla and the hype and the tools of a Drew Allar, that's a throw you've got to make. And he has missed that throw consistently. There was another throw in the fourth quarter to Tyler Warren on a seam route where Warren was open by 10 yards. And Allar put it high, and Warren had to jump and go full extension, and it went through his hands. And I'm sure Tyler Warren will tell you he should have caught the ball because it hit his hands. But whenever you're jumping 3 feet off the ground and you're full extension in the air, no one's ever going to fault any receiver for not bringing that ball in. You know, there were throws to be made that he didn't make, and they weren't challenging throws. You know, and do they win the game if you make some of those throws? Maybe. You know, that throw to Saunders on that third down when it's a one-possession game with 5 minutes to go or whatever it was, you hit him in stride, get a 20, 25-yard chunk play, maybe go a little tempo at that point. Who knows? Maybe you go down and score and tie the game. You don't know. But I think another thing from this game that was real bad look for Penn State's offense was what Michigan's offense did. They didn't throw a pass in the second half because they knew, I think in Sharon Moore's head, he knew Penn State's best chance of winning that game was J.J. McCarthy throwing an interception, a strip sack, something like that, that was going to either lead to a defensive score or give the offense a super short field. You know, I give Sharon Moore a lot of credit for the way he coached that game because the first 2 possessions, Michigan was getting rocked on the line of scrimmage by Penn State's defensive ends. So after that, they adjusted. They ditched the passing game. They went 6, sometimes 7 offensive linemen and just were cool mauling their way to 4 yards in a cloud of dust. And it worked. And, you know, the fact that a team felt they could do that, they felt that they were able to run the ball 38 straight times or whatever it was from the end of the third quarter or end of the second quarter, to the end of the game, that speaks very poorly of your offense, that they had that little faith in the opposing offense to do anything. So I think that, you know, just it was a culmination of things, I think, that led to this move being made with Mike Yurcich. And Saturday's game was just, it was the straw that broke the camel's back.
You hit on the fourth down decision, which maybe the analytics tell you to do that, but the analytics don't know how good your defense is. They don't know how shaken your quarterback is and all of that. And yeah, the third down play, the thing that went through my mind when he missed Saunders across the middle was, I'm just thinking, winter workouts, spring practice, all August, how many times does he make that throw on just a little in route right in front of him? I'm just thinking, wow. Like I try not to be overly critical because I try to give him a little bit of a pass as college quarterbacks when we're sometimes used to watching the guys on Sunday, and the level of, you know, throwing skill has just gotten to a point where it's ridiculous. But that's right in front of him. Again, like you mentioned, Saunders had separation. Yeah, it's just hard to believe in a game like that, in a moment like that, when he had to make that throw. And then the fourth down, again, maybe the analytics say to do that because you may never get the ball back. And number 2, you may get it back with 45 seconds left in the game. And so you're 6 yards away from converting and keeping the ball. So the analytics may say to go, but they don't know about a quarterback that's missing his throws and a defense that's really good and your defense that's really good. And then even in that situation, I understand he's under pressure. People are covered, but you just chuck the ball like down the sideline to one of your playmakers and hope for pass interference or a miracle catch. And at least you got like a 20% chance of completing that ball. But just seeing him continue to struggle in those situations.
Yeah. And, you know, that fourth down throw, I still have no idea who the intended target was because it didn't land close to anybody. Nick Singleton was running a wheel route. Dante Cephas, I think it was, kind of ran like a 10 and back, and Alar kind of threw it like 10 yards to the left to Singleton and like 10 yards beyond Cephas. So I don't know if someone ran a wrong route. I have no idea, but you made a really good point. You said about, the analytics, where they tell you they don't, the human element. Like, I remember Joel Klatt even mentioning this on the telecast whenever Alar came out on fourth down. His previous two throws were nearly intercepted, and then that throw behind Saunders. Like, you needed to take that into consideration there. He was clearly shaken. And like you said, your defense is really good. Your best bet was probably to maybe try and punt it and hope for a turnover or something. I don't know. It was weird to me Saturday too, because James Franklin catches a lot of flack for being too conservative of a coach. And I felt like he overcoached a lot on Saturday, where had he just been his normal conservative self, they might have been better off. Like the going for two right before halftime made no sense to me. If you go for one there, you're only down 7, which, yeah, 8's a one possession game. As that game kept going on and the possessions were the possessions were longer and you were shortening the game, you're like, man, all of a sudden being down 8 instead of 7 seems pretty big. And if you just punt on that fourth down instead of going for it, who knows what happens. And, if you go for, even if you go for one the first time, go for that fourth down, don't get it. Michigan still scores. When you score with 2.5 minutes left or whatever it was, you can kick the extra points instead of trying to 24-17. And all of a sudden, when Michigan had that third down, what was it, like 3rd and 6 with about a minute 20 or so to go, and they converted, I can tell you this. Again, human element, minute 20 to go, 3rd and 6, if it's 24-17 instead of 24-15, that defense is a lot more motivated to try and get that stop. And Michigan probably calls that play. Maybe they do throw the ball where McCarthy rolls out and maybe you can get a sack, a tip, an interception, something, just little things like that, the butterfly effect. You don't know how that could have changed the game. So I do think that that's something where I wonder if James Franklin sits back and regrets, in a lot of ways, kind of overcoaching this. It's almost like he got too tied up with trying to be aggressive or coach out of the box or whatever, when had he just kind of done what you normally would do, they might have been better off. But yeah, it was definitely a frustrating one. And similar to Ohio State, anything, it might be more frustrating in Ohio State because you were, like I said earlier, you were able to run the ball pretty successfully on Saturday. Like first down, I think they were averaging like 4.5 yards a carry on first down, which any offense is going to take that because you're setting yourself up for success as the drive goes on. So, and even coming out to start the second half, they had a good drive going until Drew Alar fumbled the ball. Where there's that 3rd and 1, Alar runs that QB draw, gets the first down. You're across midfield. You're in Michigan territory. You scored right before halftime. So an opportunity to really start to see some momentum in this game. And he fumbled the ball. And I mean, it was a good play. It was a good play by the Michigan defender. Nothing Drew did wrong. He had the ball tucked. It just was a really nice play. And, that's the frustrating part sometimes in games. My one buddy, Clay, and I were texting during the game. There were 2 fumbles in this game. There was that and the Blake Corum fumble, I think on like 2nd and 3rd play of the game.
Yep.
Both balls bounced directly to a Michigan player. The way it goes sometimes. Sometimes you just don't get, the old adage, it's better to be lucky than good sometimes. And that happened with Michigan, both fumbles. Both Corum's and Alar's bounced right to Michigan guys. And if they go the other way, one gives Penn State a first down deep Michigan territory. The other one, Penn State has first down just across the 50 and a really good drive going. So, it's in games like that, those are the little things that add up. And then you factor in the other mistakes they made and you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of it.
Or if I was going to hear Booger McFarland after that game, well, obviously he's on the other network, whatever game I was watching after that, say that Michigan totally dominated. If I heard him say that one more time, I was going to go nuts. And I actually posted on social media. I'm like, I have respect for the guy for playing the game at the highest level. So there's that. But what's he talking about? I understand that it didn't come down to the wire, but that's, to me, not the classic example of total domination. Like you say, in that kind of game, because of the score, because of the limited scoring, and also because of the limited number of possessions, because of how the game was played, that Aller fumble to start out the second half. Yeah, that was huge. That was, I thought right there, wow, that's bigger, much more so than if it's a 52-48 game and there's just all sorts of possessions and yardage and scoring, and it
Yeah,
just is.
one other thing too with that fumble is it's not just that it probably took points off the board for Penn State and put 3 points on the board for Michigan. Michigan chewed up like 9.5 minutes on that drive. They chewed up almost the entire third quarter clock. Like that was as important as anything because, like you said, low possessions, low scoring game. That's where it burnt them as much as anything was the fact that Michigan wound up by the time they finished that scoring drive, there was only like 2 minutes left in the third quarter. That chewed up essentially the entire third quarter.
I don't have a ton to add to the 2-point conversion decision by Franklin at the end of the first half, except the other thing. Yeah, I'm not big on chasing points, even when the analytics say it earlier in the game, because you don't know how the game's going to go, other than it was pretty well easy to see this is not going to be a scoring fest. So, so I get that he didn't want to be down by 4. He wanted to maintain within a field goal, I guess, or he was just, and the other issue was it wasn't like they had a really good play call. Sometimes you'll see something drawn up that's okay. First of all, Drew Aller's not, well, I say this, and he had one of his better games running the football that I've seen, at least in a big game. He was pretty effective running the ball. So I'm not going to say he's not mobile, but he's not dynamic with his legs by any stretch. And number two, they just dropped him back to pass. He got flushed right, and he just kind of had one receiver. It didn't look like they really dialed up something interesting, creative to kind of create something.
Yeah.
They just it looked like a 2nd and 7 kind of play, like in the middle of the field. Just it was just a play.
It really did. It looked more like like you said, 2nd and 7. Like, hey, you know what? Let's just run this, get 5 yards, and make a 3rd and short. It wasn't on a 2-point try. That's you either got to do one or two. Either hey, we're going to line up, we're going to punch you in the mouth, and we're going to get 2 yards the hard way, or like you said, you're going to get creative. And they didn't do either of those things. Now, like the second 2-point try, the swinging gate play, it didn't work. I didn't mind it. That play was there. Alar took too long to throw the ball. If he comes up firing, he had guys right away. And I think that's where where he's at mentally right now, I think impacted that as much as anything. But yeah, no, I'm with you too on the chasing the points. And that's what Franklin said after the game was he knew it was going to be low scoring. He saw the way the game was going. And he saw it as an opportunity to pull within a field goal, and that's why he did it. Fourth quarter, I've got no problem with that, especially in a game like this where, you know what, hey, we might only get the ball one more time. Let's make it so a field goal can tie it. But that early in the game, you don't want to do that. And I said it at the time, and it kind of proved to be true. So the worst part is, like you said, Mark, now you're chasing the points. So the next time you score, you have to go for 2. And if you don't get it then, it dominoes on you. And again, it did, because when they did score – with 2.5 minutes left, if they could have just been down 7, that completely changes. Heck, you might not even do an onside kick there. You may kick it deep because they still have 2 timeouts and over 2 minutes. You probably kick it deep. It changes the way your defense plays. It changes the offense Michigan's going to call. It changes the entire outlook of the game. So that was my biggest issue and my biggest concern, and it proved to come to fruition where being stuck chasing those points when they did score their next touchdown, that had its own ripple effect on things then.
And I got to think a drop back pass, once Aller drops back, he's got to be standing at the 12 or 13 yard. Like he was back there. Yep. And against that defense, it's just not a high percentage play. And then on top of that, this can't be measured, but you're down 14-3, you score a touchdown, you're back in the game, and everybody's going crazy. The crowd's pumped. And the missed 2-point conversion just kind of, it takes 100%. Something out off of that.
I've always been a believer that even if you're down 15, let's say, and you're going to need that 2-point try, you never go for 2 until the 2-point try is going to tie it. And that's a big reason why, because it is deflating. And again, that's where analytics aside, the human element, I've been on teams when I played in high school and things like that, where that happens. And it is somewhat deflating. Like, man, we put this great drive together. We scored. We're back in this, but we didn't get the 2-point try. So the last the lasting memory of that drive is the defense coming up big and getting a stop and in some way starting to regain the momentum, especially going into halftime where Michigan then came out and kneeled it once, put it in the locker room, and you even have a chance for your defense to maybe make a splash play and continue it going. So, no, I completely agree with that as well. I'm a big believer in that's why you don't go for two until you absolutely have to, because it can be a bit of a momentum killer even after getting a score.
Marty Lee, Penn State Rivals. Appreciate him being here as always. And folks, check out his work right there. The last thing I'll hit you with, Marty, and certainly you've got the floor to finish with anything you'd like, but you got to be kind of sick of this portion of it too, that we're looking at everything post 2016. So 2017, 18, there were some losses there. So it wasn't a pinnacle season like a New Year's Six game, but still a good season. 2017, 2019. And now most likely this team's going to finish out with 2 more wins. And usually those Ohio State, Michigan games are a little earlier in the season. So usually this sets in earlier these last couple of years where I made the statement and hate to throw it in front of you, but this team has probably played for a team that finishes as many times with New Year's Six games and top 10 finishes, probably plays more meaningless November games than anybody with that status in the country, because they're boxed into this. This is what we are, and this is the rest of the season. So, what are you looking for the rest of the season, other than, it's nice to go 11-2, win a major bowl game? And
yeah, you're right. Because, if you look at the years that they have gone on these runs, 2016 aside, when they won the Big Ten, so it was a little bit different, but 2017, they beat Michigan, but had the back-to-back loss to Ohio State and Michigan State in October. So November was essentially meaningless. 2019 was the only other year it was like this, because they played Ohio State the next to last game of the year. So they were 9-1 going to Columbus, lost, and then came out the following week and him-hawed around with Rutgers and beat them 19-6 or something ugly. And then last year was the same way. Both these losses came in October. And on the flip side of that too, I will say, last year, for example, one positive you want to call it of that, you had all of November to really kind of build some momentum back heading into the offseason, where they came out and just slaughtered everybody after those 2 games, including going to the Rose Bowl and beating Utah in a game that honestly wasn't even as close as the final score was, and build a ton of momentum going into the offseason. So, yeah, it is weird to be in November. These next 2 games are essentially, they're not meaningless because you always want to win, obviously. And, you can't afford to lose to a Michigan State or Rutgers, who are combined, 9-11 or whatever this year, but they don't carry the same weight. So, yeah, the rest of the way, at this point, you really start to turn your eye towards younger guys. Obviously, you want to see Drew Allar finish strong these last 2 games, of course. That's probably the biggest thing. And in addition to that, I think the other thing I'd want to see most is, can we finally see some explosive runs from Nicholas Singleton? Throughout the year, we've talked about the struggles of the running game. Katron Allen in recent weeks has gone back to being Katron Allen. I think dating back to, I want to say it's either the UMass or the Northwestern game, so week 5 or 6, he's averaging 5 yards a carry. He looks like Katron Allen again, but we're still not seeing the explosiveness out of Nicholas Singleton. So can we find that again? Nothing else, give him and Drew some momentum to go into heading into the offseason. And I'll also be curious too, if you're a guy like Chop Robinson, who's battled injuries this year, how much do you still play the rest of the year? Because that happened last year with Joey Porter Jr., where he had an emergency. It was a little bit different because it was an emergency thing. He had an emergency appendectomy either a day or 2 days after the Ohio State game. And he came out on senior day, started the first play of the game, came off the field, and that was the only play he played after the Ohio State game the rest of the year. Because it was, hey, yeah, you're healthy enough to play again, but you're going to be a high draft pick. These games essentially don't mean anything. He didn't want to risk it, and Penn State got that. So do we see something like that with Chop, with an Olu Fashanu, And if that does happen, that creates opportunity for younger guys. So let's see what the younger guys can do too. So that's what you're watching for the rest of the year. That, and then obviously who's going to wind up as the offensive coordinator. You make a big hire there. I think that'll really help, at least for the time being, get a lot of people more excited than they probably would be heading into next year. Because this team does lose a lot. That was part of why you pegged this year's year to make a jump, is they lose a lot. This sophomore class is really, really good, which helps. But man, that defense, which is awesome, is about to get gutted by the NFL draft. You're going to lose 3 starters off your offensive line. You're going to lose your only good wide receiver. You're going to lose Theo Johnson, who is a really good tight end. Yeah, this team's going to look a lot different next fall. So I think the rest of the way, in addition to seeing what happens with offense coordinators, that's a little bit different because that's off-field stuff. We probably won't have that answer for a few weeks. But you want to see, can Drew build some momentum towards the end of the year? Can Nicholas Singleton find that explosiveness again? If we start to see some vets, especially some vets who are banged up, who are starting to turn their eye towards the NFL now, start to play less or maybe not play the rest of the year, the young guys who get those opportunities, how do they step up? Do they seize those opportunities? Because we saw that last year a lot. When Joey Porter stepped out and didn't play a lot down the stretch, we saw Johnny Dixon and Kalen King really start to emerge. Do we see something similar at defensive end with like a Denai Dennis Sutton, for example? So those are the kinds of things I'll be watching these next couple weeks and then into the bowl game. So yeah, we'll see where it goes. Again, it's a weird spot to be in as a program. It really is, because you're consistently, like you said, Mark, you're consistently a top 10 team playing major bowls, winning those major bowls more times than not. I mean, Franklin's only been in 4 or 5 New Year's Six bowls, and the only one he lost was on a field goal at the buzzer. Like, he is a very good bowl game coach. It's strange because, like you said, the way the schedule sets up, a lot of times you get to November and those games don't mean a whole lot. But I still think that is a bit of a testament to him as a coach, that even though they've played a lot of quote unquote meaningless November games, they managed to avoid losing them. They have been, 2020 and 2021 aside, which between COVID and injuries, I think it's fair to kind of brush those seasons aside a bit. They've been really good against everyone other than Michigan and Ohio State. So I think that is a testament to him and his staff, though, that he keeps these guys bought in to still continue to win these games, even after your main goals for the season are no longer attainable.
Absolutely. And that gets lost, and nobody's going to talk about that. But I'm sure you've seen a lot more even than I have about, he needs to go and all that.
A lot of people who are more than ready to hand the keys to Matt Rule, and no knock on Matt Rule. I think he's a fine college coach, but I don't think Matt Rule has done anything to prove he's ready for a job of the caliber of Penn State.
I would agree with that. I think he's I can't add anything to that. And we're going to watch the last 2 weeks of the season in the Big Ten West, and with the understanding that at 8-2 overall, 5-2 in the Big Ten, Penn they're eliminated, because even if Michigan and Ohio State would miraculously both lose, obviously they play each other, so they're not, where in the West there's a logjam at 3-4, and those teams are mathematically alive. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable. They're 3-4 in the conference, and they're alive.
The only other thing I'll add to that is, Saturday after the game, I was watching Tim and Pat's post-game show for a while, and Patrick made the comment, goes, how much different would people view James Franklin, view this program if they were in the Big Ten West? They probably would have won the West every year for the last, 7-8 years. They'd have more than one Big Ten championship, because you think at least one other time they would have won the Big Ten championship game, probably been to the playoff at least once. Obviously it's a what if scenario that you can't, it's not real, but I think it just goes to show again how much the way people view this program and view James Franklin has more to do with the other teams in their division than it does their own program.
Yeah. And up until 2 years ago, they were okay against Michigan. That was kind of they
had won 3 prior to losing 3 in a row. The previous 7 years, they were 3-4 against Michigan. And, if you're Penn State, even Michigan, I think should be happy winning 3 or 4 out of every 7 against Penn State, because they're 2 very even programs. Michigan right now is just on one of the best 3-year runs in program history. Like you said, they'd been fine there. The big issue had been Ohio State. And now Michigan is humming along in a way they haven't hummed along at in quite a while. And kudos to them for that. Jim Harbaugh obviously has done a tremendous job, but yeah, it's that adds to the frustration too. Cause 3 years ago, this would have looked a lot differently, because Penn State and Michigan were on much more of a level footing.
Yeah. You're going to see a team in the Big Ten championship that Penn State held to 76 total yards and 4 first downs.
Yep. It's frustrating. It definitely is.
Well, it's going to be a new world next year. That's for
Yes.
sure.